Score Points, a podcast for those who want to distract themselves from the news for 30 to 45 minutes and learn about the NBA instead. Each episode focuses on one NBA game from that week. And NBA beginner Irish, that's me, and longtime NBA fan Sam.
That's me.
Learn more about the NBA games, people, and current events. Today, we have a very special episode. Andrew is here to tell us everything about the draft. It's our best episode yet.
For sure.
I'm excited to introduce Andrew, who is here to talk about the draft. Andrew, I know nothing about the draft, except that it is some sort of process where they're getting new players. That's all I know.
And we think maybe it's for sale in exchange for Luka Doncic.
Yes.
That's the other thing.
Right. Yes. What a year to start following the NBA, Irish. What a year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, you get all the drama. You have a great playoffs going on right now. It is an incredible year. Yeah, conspiracy theorists are out in full force this season, which is really an exciting part of the NBA as well. Being able to see that if you trade away your superstar, make your city angry, you get the number one pick afterwards, and you get a generational talent and one of the most kind of sure thing NBA prospects that's come along in a generation or so.
Andrew, before we jump into this year's draft, you reached out to Irish a while ago and said that you are interested in the draft or follow the draft closely. Is that right?
100%. I am part of the draft nerd community. There is a whole sub-genre of NBA fans who just love the draft, love everything around the draft. For me, it came about growing up overseas. Following the NBA from Jakarta, Indonesia in the 80s and early 90s was very difficult.
Yeah.
USA Today's, you're trying to grab USA Today's and look at whatever the most recent scores were from there. Wow. And also Sports Illustrated's, 3 weeks after their print in the US would show up in Indonesia. And so you'd get a chance to read some of those new articles that were coming out there. When I would get back to the US during the summer, usually the playoffs were wrapping up, but then it was draft season. And so the only basketball talk for a kid who just absolutely loved basketball was the NBA draft. And they had all the new magazines would come out, all these different preview editions and everything. And so that's where I got getting into it. And then with the birth of the internet, NBA draft boards became a thing very early on with, places where people pre-Reddit and all of that found a place to let out all their nerdy statistical analysis and things like that. The first draft I remember was Joe Smith getting drafted in 1994, I want to say, or something like that.
Maryland, right?
Maryland, Joe Smith, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
First pick. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and of course, right before then had been the Weber draft and the Shaquille O'Neal draft that I had read about and thought those were so cool.
Right.
So the early 90s were an awesome time to be a basketball fan. It was so much fun. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I think Irish has really missed out on NBA Inside Stuff. I think that would have been a really good gateway into the NBA for her, and I don't think anything quite exists like that anymore.
Interesting.
With Ahmad Rashad and
Ahmad Rashad,
yeah.
We're trying to fill that hole with this podcast.
Right. Yeah, but they would do all the human interest stories and things like that I think she would just lock in. And then they do the blooper plays, and then they do the best plays like she could in 22 minutes have had a much quicker way into the NBA.
Right. So do you follow college hoop pretty closely?
I do. I enjoy college basketball. It's overwhelming how many, to really do it well. Being back in the US now for the past 2 years, just the amount of games on TV is unreal. It's kind of blown my mind just how much there is to follow. But I do try to watch. Of course, I follow the NCAA tournament really closely, but I also try to watch as many games throughout the season as possible, especially when you know that there are NBA prospects involved in the game.
Yeah. Do you watch college largely to check these guys that are getting hyped
Yeah. So my family are all Duke fans, and so I watch a lot of Duke basketball, which gets me to watch a lot of other high level prospects. Right. The ACC is filled with great prospects. And then I myself am a BYU fan, and so that hasn't been as relevant. But in the past 2 years, as they have joined the Big 12, been able to see a whole lot more basketball that way as well with some big time prospects. So I watch for my own fandom, and then also.
Why are you a BYU fan? No disrespect.
Right. No, that's where I went to school. So I went to BYU.
Oh,
so Danny Ainge is our greatest player of all time, but then Jimmer is a close second in terms of how much people love him.
I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Oh, yeah, that's another that fits right into the why teams make bad picks in the NBA draft. Fits right into that conversation.
Yeah.
I lived in Boston for one short year when I was really young, 1985-86. School year. My parents were working at Dana Hall out in Wellesley. The local Latter-day Saint congregation during that year had Danny Ainge, Greg Kite, and Bruce Hurst, the pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, were all And so it was this like super Boston sports. My dad said it was the best year of church he's ever been to. You know, like there were always high level discussions about sports going on, people
Yeah.
praying for the health of athletes over the pulpit. You know, it was the perfect like Boston insane sports fandom and religious experience coming
Yeah.
together. So yeah.
So were you
I was only 4 at that time. I was born in 82, so
Oh,
I don't remember anything about it. But then we moved overseas, and I was raised on the like 1986 Celtics are the greatest basketball team of all time. And this is what I grew up hearing, you know. And if you want to model your game after anyone, player on that team because
yeah.
they're all
Did
God's
you
gift to the basketball world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one thing from someone who follows the draft closely
Yeah.
is, are you surprised that teams are as bad as they are as drafting? Are you surprised that they're as good as they are, or is it about what you would expect?
Yeah. I think there are some teams or some eras of teams that are specifically bad, and you can look at them and say they're terrible.
Yeah.
You know, the Timberwolves of some years were
Yeah.
notoriously bad. The Kings have had some really questionable picks, like Marvin Bagley Jr. over Luka Doncic, you know, that, or Jaren
Yeah.
Jackson or Trae Young for that matter. Like
Yeah.
those ones, you just kind of look at and scratch your head at some of the teams. But on average, it is the most inexact science. You know, it is such an inexact science for most picks. You know, in a good draft, I think people can say here are 2 or 3 sure things. You know, this year we're looking at a draft where people are saying there are 2 or 3 kind of surefire NBA stars. After that, you get into a position where teams have to make the decision whether they're going to go for the highest ceiling, go for the most predictable kind of floor. You run into a situation where I don't get surprised when teams swing and miss on picks usually, because there's usually some logic to why they're doing it, to try to fit their team needs, to try to just, oh, this person has all the upside. So after watching it for so many years, I don't get emotionally attached to how dumb is this team. Usually you're looking at it, you're like, okay, that guy's 6'7", hyper athletic, super long arms. If he can learn how to do A, B, and C, he's going to be a star. The issue is that so many players don't learn how to do A, B, and C. And so what looked like, you know, and you're talking about 19-year-olds, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. We all reflect back to 18 to 19 and 20-year-olds ourselves. Like, did we know who we were going to become even 5 years after that? And here are people trying to make tens of millions of dollars worth of bets on what a 19-year-old is going to turn into. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the piece where if we think about the average NBA career is slightly less than 5 years. Okay. So at the top of the draft, the average career is over 10 years for the first pick, but it quickly drops down to that 5 years by midway through the first half. And so historically, on average, you're looking at by the second half of the first half, in the second half, you're looking at it's a roll of the dice and it's a crapshoot.
I know. It always surprises me the way that picks are swapped in trades
Right.
as though they mattered that much, right?
Right.
Like you make a trade and it includes like a first round pick for a good team.
Yeah.
You're like getting the 23rd pick in the draft it's not football. Like there's not that
Right.
kind of depth. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yep. But you go with that idea of hope springs eternal, right?
Yeah.
You never know if you get a draft pick from another team 3 years down the road. You don't know who's going to get injured. You don't know if the Celtics are going to be missing Tatum next year, and Brown may have to have knee surgery as well.
Yeah.
And Porzingis is Porzingis. And you look at it and you say, well, a Celtics pick all of a sudden may have some value next year.
Right.
Okay. So to roll it back, Irish, the NBA draft is the time where hope does spring eternal, right? Every team gets to look at this and say, this is our chance to get a potential star and to make our team better. So there is the thing called the draft lottery, which you followed a little bit this year, or at least know that it happened because it was rigged for the Mavericks, right?
It was, right?
Yeah. The ping pong ball system is supposed to be, they do have someone who comes in and audits the lottery and everything like that. So we could always say that that there's no conspiracies there, but it sure feels like it.
Sorry to interrupt, Irish. We've talked about it before, but in 1984, the Knicks got the first pick in the draft, and Patrick Ewing was in that class, and he was like the most sure thing in an NBA draft in a long time. And it's obviously great for the NBA to have a good team in New York, right? That like creates excitement or whatever.
Yeah.
And the conspiracy is that back then they would pick envelopes
Uh-huh.
to tell, and the conspiracy is that there was a frozen envelope that they put the Knicks one in the freezer,
Oh.
and then
So that
made sure they could pick that one last so that the Knicks could get the first pick. So the frozen envelope is like an NBA lore kind of.
Okay.
So that was like the first lottery. And in the first lottery, every team who didn't make the playoffs got a lottery pick. And so they all got one envelope in this bucket, and they picked out one envelope, and that's who got the first pick. They realized that wasn't necessarily fair, and that a team that just missed the playoffs was in a much better position, theoretically, than a team that finished with the worst record in the league. And so over the years, they've gone through different iterations of it. But the worse you do now, the higher your chance of getting the first pick. So this year, if I remember correctly, and I don't, the top three picks now get the same kind of percentage chance to get the first pick. And so it was the Wizards, the Hornets, and the Jazz. They all had the worst records this year. So they won it's fun every year they kind of come up with a different name if there's a good draft pick coming up. So the one I liked this year was Poop for Coop. That was so that's you're going to do terrible to get Cooper Flag, right? So these three teams all thought they had the best chance, and then out comes the lottery, and the team with a less than 2% chance of getting the first pick gets the first pick. And then the Spurs jump all the way up to number 2. And the Sixers, who, if they had been later, would have given their pick to the Thunder based off of a previous trade.
Right.
Instead got the third pick, and so they get to keep their own pick. And so those three teams that had all pooped for Coop are now drafting 4, 5, and 6. So some fan bases really are hurting right now because they're talking about this draft like there are 3 surefire NBA stars in the draft, and everything else after that is some form of a risk, gamble, or next tier. So that's where
Really, after the top 3, then people are not impressed.
Well, people are very impressed with the potential. With the NBA draft, there's this point where you really are drafting 18 to 22-year-olds who you think are going to be good. And so you're trying to project in the best case scenario, because of these athletic attributes and these things that we've seen and this character and work ethic, we think this kid's going to make it. And so teams are all doing these evaluations. There are sometimes, though, prospects that you can see who just have everything that the NBA looks for. And so those are the ones that they can really feel more confident about. So this year you have Cooper Flag, who is the clear number 1. There's no conversation about that. He's the number 1. And then the next 2 are these guys who played at Rutgers, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Now, the funny thing is Rutgers was terrible this year.
Yeah,
so if
how?
you watched college basketball, because with the NIL and just the way teams are constructed now, the other 8 guys who were getting playing time really weren't very good. And so they were all guys from lower level recruits or transfers that came in from mid-major or smaller Division I conferences. And so good basketball players, but not ready to compete at the level that Rutgers has to in the Big Ten.
So why would these number 2 and number 3, no offense to Rutgers,
Right.
why are they at Rutgers and not at like Kentucky?
5 years ago, we would have been making more conspiracy theory kind of winking things about what incentives they had to come, because previously you weren't allowed to get paid as an NCAA player. But in the new name, image, likeness era, the players can get paid. So the Rutgers coaches obviously made compelling basketball and financial arguments to these 2 gentlemen to get them there.
Wow.
So anyone can play. Like my alma mater, Brigham Young University, next year is bringing in the number 1 player in the country. That is not something that we've ever been able to do, but we have boosters who happen to own the Utah Jazz, who have been happily funding the name, image, likeness fund at BYU to help make deals like that happen. So it's kind of fun when your team's the one spending money. You know, that's a good thing.
The just like a really brief history. We've talked with Anthony on this podcast about tanking.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
I
did. Yes.
The process, exactly.
Nicely done, Irish.
Yeah. And when he was talking about iterations, the NBA has gone through a lot of different ways to weigh the odds in the lottery.
Yeah.
And so like a while ago, it was if you were the worst team in the league, you had a much better chance than you do now of ending up with the first overall pick. And the NBA wanted to kind of discourage the like blatant tanking that was going on, you know what I mean? And so they've disincentivized that. There can be arguments about the effect. If you're a Jazz fan or a Wizards fan or a Charlotte fan, you're really not happy about that choice right now because they were the worst teams. They don't get that pick, but the Sixers and the Spurs are, and obviously the Mavericks are sitting pretty right now. So that's sort of the brief, not very detailed history of that, how the lottery has unfolded.
Yeah.
So actual NBA draft night is a super exciting night, but between now and then, we had the draft lottery probably 2 weeks ago, right? 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's been a thing called the NBA Combine, which is like a beauty pageant for prospective NBA prospects. They come, they get measured. How tall are you without shoes on, which causes a lot of controversy because people's height changes from what it was listed at in college all of a sudden. And so then they get their weight, they go through some athletic and agility testing. And if they choose, they can join in some 5-on-5 scrimmages. Lots of the best players won't join in those scrimmages because of the chance of not all exposure is good exposure. Sometimes you get exposed in the wrong way and it's a less controlled environment, right? And so you'll get a lot of guys, though, who it is funny when it's happening. All of a sudden, there are tweets coming out about this guy just measured an inch shorter than we thought. Will this change everything? A lot of discussion of wingspan. You're going to hear the term wingspan more in the next month if you're following the NBA than you've ever heard before. There's a whole drinking game based off of the term wingspan. There's an NBA analyst who likes to say that. And so on draft night, people will take a shot every time they hear wingspan.
The Jay Billis?
Jay Billis, yeah, and they won't get much further the first half of the first round. So, but yeah, June 25th is the exciting night. And so between now and then, teams are also bringing in players for workouts, bringing in players for interviews. You get all of these little bits and pieces coming out via Twitter and other kind of ways, and just people just kind of talking about who teams seem to be interested, who they're bringing in for workouts, what teams are being deceptive, which teams do we know are locked on a person. And then some prospects will start canceling their workouts with teams. And so then you're trying to read the tea leaves there and say, did a team promise them that they were going to pick them, which means that they don't want to work out for other teams because they don't want those teams to pick them. There's a lot of drama. And then on draft night itself, it's this fun event where the commissioner gets up and calls out the teams make a pick every 10 minutes and call it out. There's a second round as well, which unfortunately now happens the day after. I liked it much better when it was all in one night. Now it knocks out 2 days of my life. And so the second round happens and the teams all get then a second pick.
So for the draft, it's
Yes.
new players coming out of college.
Or international, or guys who have
international.
played, guys who are from overseas. Yep.
And is there any shuffling amongst the existing players? Like when we talk about
Right.
Giannis Antetokounmpo, does he get drafted
Nice
on
work.
draft night?
No. So players who have contracts with current teams are staying on the teams. But what does happen, and this is also very exciting, is lots of trades happen.
Great.
And then there's also lots of discussion of free agent signings. So when a player's contract runs out at a team, they become a free agent and they can go on the open market and sign a new contract with another team. The free agency begins in early July, so that about 10 days after the draft. And so what you'll see on draft night is lots of discussions about how teams have agreed in principle to a contract with somebody, or they've agreed in principle to a contract to a trade, which assumes that they've re-signed a player that then they're going to send. And so there's all these kind of moving parts that happen. And then, like I was saying about reading the tea leaves, a lot happens on draft night where people start thinking about, okay, if that team drafted that person, is it because they're targeting this person in free agency, and what's going to happen and what's the market going to be like for those guys? So,
Yeah, or does their draft pick make someone on their current team redundant? And like how is that going to shape their roster moving
and
forward?
how can you trade that person then? And there's a lot of things going on. And this is not an area where I'm not good yet because they've just changed it all. But the salary cap is super confusing now, and they have different thresholds where if you exceed, you're penalized in certain ways, both monetarily and with the types of contracts you can sign. And so lots of teams some are looking maybe to jettison an expensive veteran player to try to get another draft pick, to take a swing at a young player whose contract is much less.
What is definitely true is that having players on rookie contracts is like more valuable than ever because
Absolutely.
This is functioning basically like a hard cap. Like teams are penalized so heavily for having a big payroll, like above the limit, that no owner is going to be like, okay, I'm going to pay a $250 million penalty just to have this salary this year. So the Spurs are in a really wild spot. They've got Wemby. They've got this guy Castle, who I don't know if he's won Rookie of the Year yet, but he's at least in the conversation. He did.
Yep.
And then they're going to have the second overall pick this year. So these next 3 years, they're going to have three like really highly impact players, none of whom are making a max salary yet, which is like a really, really enviable position for a team right now.
The Thunder are so good because they've done the NBA draft right over the years, and they have Sam Presti, who is kind of a wonder kid, was the wonder kid, but now is no longer a kid. He's their general manager, and he went a little bit with the idea of the process of acquiring lots of draft picks, but also came from the Spurs, where they did a very good job historically of drafting prospects and especially identifying undervalued prospects. And so he put that together in Oklahoma City, and they've done really well drafting people kind of, like guys who you see play right now in the conference championships. Yeah. Well, so the first big one that people are speculating is that they're asking the question, the Spurs have both the second pick and the 14th pick and some good contracts. People are talking about how Giannis may want out of Milwaukee. So that's the big one going in is someone going to trade for Giannis? And of course the Mavericks could, but would the Mavericks give up on a generational 18-year-old talent for someone who's only in his early 30s, but, has, over a decade of NBA games of wear and tear? So everyone's thinking, initially some people were trying to create, headlines, get their comments aggregated by, saying outrageous things about the Dallas trade, but there's been no indication that that's the case. The Spurs are always very coy, keep things close to the chest, but there's a conversation there. Would the Spurs take a swing at someone like Giannis? And there's the chance for other trades that could happen. My Utah Jazz, now that they're not going to get Cooper Flagg, and they know they're going to be bad again next year. There's just, they are terrible. They are absolutely terrible, but they got a bunch of young guys and trying to figure out which of these young guys are actually going to be something. Is there a talk about them trading away the last few veterans of value like Lauri Markkanen and Jordan Clarkson, getting those guys and getting some return for them during the draft? And so it's always fun to see the trades happen because it throws the curveball into what all the people who have been predicting the picks have said over the past month. One trade all of a sudden can derail the entire order that people think the draft's going to go. The big argument you're going to hear throughout the month leading up to the draft is, should a team draft the best prospect available, or should they draft the best fit for what they need? So the idea of this kid's going to turn into the best NBA player or has the potential to be the best NBA player, or right now we desperately need someone who can shoot and we don't have enough shooters, so we just need to draft the best shooter.
Historically, how does that turn out? There must be statistics on which is better.
Historically, the draft nerds lean in the direction of take the best player available / best prospect available. When you draft for fit, you end up talking yourself into prospects who are not as good. If you draft someone for shooting, well, there's this thing in basketball where you have to be able to dribble and pass the ball, and there's this whole other side of the court where you have to play defense. And so, when you draft this guy who's been an incredible scorer and shooter in college, you end up in this scenario oftentimes where they're missing other key skill sets.
I can't really think of that many examples of a time where like a rookie comes in as even I don't know, the second best player on a championship team. It takes a long time. We were talking earlier about like Wemby, who's like the best prospect since LeBron. He still hasn't made the playoffs. You know what I mean? And like he's really good. It takes time.
Yeah.
And so there are occasionally times, where like the Boston Celtics in the early 80s trade away a pick and get Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish. Kevin McHale draft him as a rookie and go for a run. But that's an exception, a true exception. It's usually the teams at the top of the draft are so broken and so bad. The Spurs with Tim Duncan in the late 90s, a name, Irish, you may not yet. Yes, Tim Duncan. Okay. No, big fundamental. Well, there you go. So he very fundamentally sound basketball player. David Robinson was another Hall of Fame center who was on the Spurs and had been injured. And so they tanked that year and they got the first pick instead of the Boston Celtics and were able to draft a guy and get a healthy player back and were immediately good again. And so it takes something weird like that to happen for a team to both have a high draft pick and be competitive the next year. So that's where the Spurs are in this really enviable position, and the Mavericks arguably as well. The Mavericks have some question marks they need to answer, like with Kyrie injured, who's going to play on the perimeter? But with Anthony Davis and Cooper Flag, you should be immediately competitive. With those two.
Can anyone on that team dribble?
Do they need to dribble, or can we just pass over the head of everyone?
Right.
So when you fill for need, oftentimes you're taking a lower level prospect and they're turning exactly into what you think they would become then. It just, those are the guys who end up being labeled as busts and being out of the league really quickly. So
who's your all-time favorite bust?
My all-time favorite bust? Well, we all got to love Adam Morrison, who he was on Gonzaga, and he was, floppy-haired kid who was just this incredible shooter. And famously, the Charlotte Bobcats at the time, before they switched back to the Hornets, drafted him because Michael Jordan owned the team at the time, and he liked to draft guys who had been successful in college. Well, Adam Morrison, he had a knee injury, but he also couldn't play defense, wasn't very athletic, could shoot, but if you can't get open in the NBA, you can't shoot. And so it's one of the hard things with predicting these guys. You see you say, oh, past success should predict future success. But just the level of athleticism, the level of competition in the NBA makes it so that really you have to be looking at things beyond just how they played in college to determine whether they'll be good in the NBA.
Yeah.
The other big swing and miss that people make, Irish. So you got a nerd talking. I told you this was going to be. So the other big thing that you'll see is a lot of people will use historical precedent from recent years to make a pick that you see they're trying to, lightning striking twice or something like that, right? So my favorite example is in 2013, the Bucks swing in the middle of the first round for this kid who's it's grainy film out of Greece, right? So here's where Giannis comes in, right? You should go and watch. I'll send it to you. The footage that was shown on draft night was this kid who you're like, okay, yeah, who's he playing with though, right? He's playing in this lower level Greek league, but he's this incredible athlete. And so the Bucks took a swing on him and he came in incredibly raw and he developed over the year, but during that first year you saw in him like, oh, this kid's really athletic. This kid's very different. So the next year the Raptors are like, we're going to do that too. And they took this guy named Bruno Caboclo or something like that, right? In the middle late first round, they're like, we got our Brazilian version of Giannis. And Bruno never, he played a lot of G League basketball, played some NBA games, probably made, $10-15 million during his career, which is wonderful for him. But he plays in a Canadian league now, which is not the highest level basketball. And so, here's this guy but he looked exactly like Giannis, the same kind of like grainy footage of this 6'9" kid with arms for days. And so you'll see this happen time and again where people will be like, oftentimes with international players where, Dirk Nowitzki becomes this huge star for the Mavericks, and so everyone says, we got to go find the next Dirk out of Europe. And for years, they're drafting these guys who are tall shooters out of Europe, and they were just terrible time and time and time again.
Darko? Was it Darko?
Darko. See, I have a soft spot for Darko, okay? I feel like Darko's the other argument here. So there's an example of a guy who won a championship at the beginning of his career. Darko Milicic had an incredible workout. He's 7 feet tall, left-handed, just this, big physical guy, but was shooting threes and just wowed and amazed everyone in the same year that LeBron James was drafted. And so LeBron James is drafted first. And instead of going for Carmelo Anthony, who was, the biggest name, who is now, Hall of Fame player, the Pistons took this guy, Darko Milicic. But then Larry Brown, their coach at the time, believed that no rookie should ever play in an NBA game. So stuck him at the end of the bench on a really good team. So Darko never got in and never really learned how to play in the NBA. Had some okay years later on for bad teams, but he just by that point was broken. And so he's a what if. There are lots of what ifs from the draft as well, but he was on the wrong team and the team didn't develop him. And you see this time and again with teams that are just bad at developing players. The Charlotte Hornets are terrible at developing players. They get a draft at the top of the draft every year because they're always bad, and they just pretty much ruin draft prospects over and over and over again. So yeah.
That Darko draft, Dwayne Wade was also in that draft.
Yep.
And maybe someone
And
else.
Chris Bosh.
Chris
Bosh as well. Yep. So, this historically great draft that then your second pick goes to a guy who is now really famous for being able to chug 2 beer bottles at once. And there's lots of great footage of him kickboxing back in Serbia and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
You follow the NBA, Arch. If you keep up this journey, you will go into some of the strangest places of the internet and have some of the greatest time reading just absurd stories and rumors and very, very flawed people who with lots and lots of money doing kind of crazy things.
Yeah.
Like Brooke Lopez, Disney adult.
Really? Or really wholesome things, I guess, right?
Thank you.
Still, I think it's so weird.
You should wait. I'll also send you a link to the Bison Dele Brian Williams story. That's the same guy. He changed his name. His story is incredible. Ends up with murder in Tahiti on a catamaran. That's if you really, like the NBA, it's a wonderful soap opera. Like I get to follow a soap opera. My daughter loves watching her K dramas and C dramas, right? And watches these huge, 60 episode long, stories. I just get to follow the NBA, and I get all the drama and all of that, but in a very masculine kind of sports jock way. That's I think the other thing that's always interesting is always to see the teams that try to use whether they went to a certain school or whether they performed well in the NCAA tournament as the predictor of success. The school one is hit or miss. So for years, Kentucky, if you went to Kentucky, you were drafted in the NBA draft, and for many people, it worked out. Jamal Murray. Devin Booker, you're one of your favorites, right? Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, all these, Julius Randle, all these great guys went to Kentucky because they were the best at recruiting the best high school athletes, right?
Yeah.
So people always use that as the discussion of look at all these great guys that came out of Kentucky. If you look, the list of guys drafted is much longer than that, and lots of guys who spent a very short time in the NBA. And so there's only some success you have with that. The other big indicator of someone is going to fall in love with a guy named Walter Clayton Jr., who was the most outstanding player of the NCAA tournament this year. The most outstanding player of the NCAA tournament is very rarely a successful NBA player.
Really?
And so a guy who goes on a hot streak during the NCAA tournament, teams then see that, that's who we're getting. And there's Walter Clayton Jr. is a shooting guard who is too short for an NBA shooting guard. So that's actually, he's a phenomenal shooter. But at 6'2", 6'3", how do you get your shot off when you're being guarded by these guys on the Oklahoma City Thunder who all have arms that, arms for days, wingspan. Yep. Arms for days, and just insane athletes. And so that's something where you'll see time and again, a team will go and swing for this most outstanding player, saying look, they're a big time game player, and they're going to end up statistically very likely to not succeed. I still haven't quite figured out who your style of player is. I have the sense of the personality that you like with the Jared McCain love, Irish. There isn't quite a McCain level personality in the draft this year. Sorry. You have some really interesting guys to follow though, like Haman Malawach from Duke is this 7'2" guy with an incredible wingspan who's from South Sudan, only started playing basketball at 13. And so if you want to talk about a guy who's going to be, if you can imagine 5 years ago, he's only 18 as well, so he hasn't even turned 19 yet. Here he is 5 years after picking up basketball for the first time. He's going to sign a contract for somewhere between $5 to $8 million a year. That's such a cool personal interest story, but talk about a high risk, high reward prospect. On the other hand, if you like your Midwest, you're just straight up Midwest boys, Con Knippel, who was on Duke's team as well, is as Wisconsin. You look at him, and you're like, oh, you're from Wisconsin. Boxy, flat top. He looks like a stereotype Midwestern, farm boy almost. And he also played on Duke. And so there's this, there's discussion about him, about his limited athletic potential, but he's a really hard worker. And oh man, can he shoot? And does he have the physical tools and stuff? So I feel like there's going to be someone who you can fall in love with in this draft, but I just haven't quite figured out who it is for you yet. That's Yeah, I'll let you know when I do.
Okay, and is it something that like I should look into these players now, or is this something that I'll be figuring out kind of during June 25th?
Well, so I think that's where what type of fan you are comes into play here, right? I do not encourage you to join me on the, Hoops Hype rumors page and other Reddit things and have your Twitter account be all things NBA draft. That's a sad world to get too deep into. You could go the route of seeing who the Nuggets select and then doing a deep dive to see,
Ah,
this is my team. Who are these guys? You could even, if you want to just test the waters a little bit, look in to see who people are saying the Nuggets could be interested in to maybe form an opinion there. But the Nuggets or the Wolves, your other team. But it's it's something maybe just on the 25th, just checking in to see who was selected, and then maybe just dabbling after that to find out the backstories of these people. But
Well, you gotta come back in July and talk
yeah.
about surprises.
I'll be back. Yeah, I'll be back because then because the coolest thing happens after the NBA draft, after free agency. Then there's a thing called Summer League. Oh
Oh,
man.
right.
And that's the other thing. Actually, I didn't tell you about that. There used to be a thing called the Rocky Mountain Review in Salt Lake City. And so that was the other basketball I'd get during the summer. My dad and I would go, and for $5, you could get an all-day pass to sit in the Delta Center and just watch these guys who are fringe NBA players or recent draft picks or the kind of young guys who'd only been in the year for the league for a year or two. You used to get to go and just watch them play all day long. So it was a really it's now held in Vegas because they realized they can make money out of it, so they took it out of Utah and put it down in Vegas. There's still a small one in Utah, but the main one's down in Vegas, and they make kind of like a 2-week event out of it. And so you can follow that in July. So after that, then there's all this great stuff to talk about. What do teams look like based off of trades, off the draft? Who's looking good in the NBA Summer League? Who was disappointing? Who's gotten better during their first year in the NBA? Who didn't get much actual NBA time, but then they pop off during Summer League, and everyone goes, "Oh wow! If you spend a whole year playing basketball, you do get better." That's
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So I would love to come back in July, talk about all the things that have moved around. I told you things were going to get. I think I was going to get into it. My apologies. Very
No.
rarely do I have a platform to talk about the NBA draft. My wife gives me about like 3 minutes at a time, and sadly, her birthday is June 26th. And so most years the NBA draft falls on her birthday, and she has been very nice during our 20 years of marriage to let me have
Wow.
those couple of hours at night. So yeah.
Well, it's a special year for her this year because
Yes.
it's not on her
Well,
birthday.
but then they moved the second round to the day so now it's the 25th and 26th are the NBA draft. So the question is, does the second round matter enough? And I don't think so, but we'll see when the time comes.
I mean, Jokic was drafted in the second round.
Right. And people use that all the time as the
Jokic-
example.
And Jokic slept through that draft. So
Right.
Yeah.
And Jokic was really fat at that time. And this is the thing is that, people, if we're talking about historical precedent, people use this all the time. Well, in the second round, you can find Jokic. And it's like, yeah, once
Yeah.
every 10 to 15 years, but hope springs eternal. So everyone thinks
Yeah.
they're going to be the ones. You have very
Yeah.
smart people saying, we figured it out. We are going to find the guy.
We got to find another fat
Yeah.
Slovenian guy.
Okay. No, I do have one for you. Okay.
Okay.
Here's the guy you're going to have to fall in. Hansen Yang out of China. They
Woo.
call him the Chinese Jokic. He is the prospect. He plays in the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association, and he's in the NBA draft this year. And people say he has great passing touch, and he's a huge guy. And they're saying, could he be the next Jokic? And the answer is, of course not.
No.
But could he be a relevant NBA player? Maybe. And any time where a Chinese player becomes a relevant NBA player, it's super exciting. So,
Yeah.
because China gets very into it. So,
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah, there we go. Okay.
that was awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay. Thanks for the time.
Yeah,
this is so great. Thank you for joining us. And this was fantastic. And we'll
yeah,
see.
we really will get you back in July after the draft happens. That'd be
Okay.
awesome.
Well, I'll be ready. Short notice. You can just call me up the morning of, and I'll be ready. Just
Okay.
this is what I do. So
I
anyway.
love it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. Thank you for listening to Go Team Score Points. Today's episode was edited by Irish. You can reach us at goteamscorepoints@gmail.com. Thank you so much to Andrew. This is the end of season 1 of Go Team Score Points. Join us in the next few weeks for season 2, where we learn about the WNBA with Alice. See you then. Okay.
Season 1.
I know. That's so
Wrap.
crazy. Wow. Good job, us. We
Yeah,
did it.
good job. Good job. It's great.